Welcome to the Pulpit View podcast. My name is Stephen Garrett. With over 20 years of experience in leadership, family, and ministry, I've asked some brothers to come join me and have a conversation of what it takes to bring balance to each. Why don't you join me on this journey? Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pulpit View. My name is Stephen Garrett. I've had the privilege of pastoring for more than 15 years and being in leadership for more than 20. One of the greatest parts of my journey that has been exciting, revigorating, is the time I have to talk to leaders that have already done it before us. Today, I'm excited because we have a leader par excellence. He's one that has not only pastored in the midst of the pandemic, but he has led pastors in the midst of the pandemic. I have our very own National Baptist president with us today, that of Dr. Jerry Young. He is the pastor of the phenomenal church, New Hope Missionary Baptist Church, for more than 42 years. He is a husband, he's a father, and he has the privilege of carrying the title of grandfather as well. I think the beauty out of all of that is that he's been married for over 50 years. And anyone that knows the Pulpit View knows how much I prize longevity in marriage. He's a philanthropist. He is a ministry leader. And with all of his accolades, he's taken the time out to be with us today. I want you all to join me as we are welcoming the president of the National Baptist Convention with us today, Dr. Jerry Young. Dr. Jerry Young, I just want to tell you from the bottom of my heart how excited I am to have you today.
I am delighted to be with you. Have been married 49 years to be exact.
49.
I don't want Mrs. Young to think that I was married some other time. I mean, over 50 years, only 49 years.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 49 years. Question. So I know ministry started a little after the marriage.
Actually,
in the sense of pastoring.
Before, I was a young pastor when I married.
Amen. Amen. So you've been at New Hope for 42 years. How long have you been pastoring?
Actually, I have been pastoring now for 50 years to be exact. I think it is. I pastored my first church, I think. Yeah, 50 years. So they kind of run neck to neck. I see why we had to make that clear up, because that pastoring is definitely a challenge sometimes. I do have a question for you. As a pastor that has decades of experience and a husband that has decades of experience, what would you take us back to some of the early years of ministry and marriage and how you seem to intertwine the two? Well, certainly. I got to be perfectly honest at this point and say that the fact that I was already a young pastor when I met my wife, I think was advantageous and conducive. She was aware in the very beginning that she was marrying a pastor, and that we had an opportunity to talk about those issues and perhaps what would be coming. My father was a pastor for quite some time, and obviously learned a great deal from him, as I did many of the other pastors there in the community. But having already been involved in the pastorate, I think was advantageous and conducive. My wife actually married a pastor. Mm-hmm. I think that oftentimes what happens is that men get called to ministry after they have been married.
Yes, sir.
And it creates a different kind of a challenge, because so many times the young lady said, I didn't marry a preacher, I didn't marry a pastor. And that itself creates many different kinds of challenges. So my challenges were not nearly as great, primarily because I was already a pastor.
I love it. I think that's one of the difficulties many of us as young pastors deal with, especially in our day and age now, because when you're coming in, it's almost as if, especially if you're beginning to pastor after marriage, it's almost as if you're taking on a whole nother spouse. You have these folk that need your time, have the freedom of calling you at all different hours. And if your wife is not uniquely understanding of that, you are 100% correct. It can cause problems on other ends.
No question.
One of the things that I love about your ministry in totality is the affection I see for your wife publicly. That is something that I feel as pastors sometimes we can put on, and it doesn't always come off as genuine as it needs to be. Yours comes off as genuine, as if she is impactful to your day-to-day life. Can you kind of take us in just a little bit behind closed doors, how impactful she is to the ministry and to the man, Dr. Jerry Young?
Well, I'll tell you what, I am completely convinced, without question. And in fact, I don't think there's any debate whatsoever. The man who findeth a wife find it's a good thing.
Yes, sir.
And I argue that without exception, my wife is by any measurement an extraordinary and wonderful wife. Wonderful wife. Give you an example in terms of what she does. In fact, we moved to Jackson, Mississippi from Greenville, Mississippi, for me to attend Reformed Theological Seminary. I'd spoken to my wife about it. We debated and discussed it, prayed about it, and decided that we was going to do it. She's going to follow me here. She's going to give up a job. She's working there in the city of Greenville. We got here to Jackson Reformed Theological Seminary, and it was quite challenging. And my first day in class, I was put into a Hebrew class, and I didn't even know where the bookstore was. I didn't know where the library was, and went to the class, and the professor was writing from right to left, and I thought something was wrong with him. I thought that he was in error. And then at the end of the class, he says, "And this is your quiz for tomorrow." Now, I don't even have a textbook. I don't even know where the bookstore is. I just barely got in class on the first day.
Come on.
And so Tom Anderson, who was a white brother from Alabama, came up to me after class and said, "Look, you don't have the books." I said, "I don't know where the bookstore is." So Tom Anderson carried me to the bookstore and pointed out for me the books I needed and things like that. And this is what you need to do. And so Tom was extremely helpful. We became very good friends. And so I went home and I looked at the textbook, and this is gospel. It all looked like Greek to me.
Yes, sir.
Hebrew. I mean, it was unbelievable. And so I was wrestling and struggling and trying to make it happen. So I finally came home that week later and went to various courses, and man, this stuff was just unbelievable. So I called my wife into the room and I said, "Look," I said, "I think that I've made a mistake. I mean, I know I told you that I felt like God was leading me to do this and everything else." And I said, "But I honestly believe I misread God on this one. I think that we probably gonna need to go back to Greenville, Mississippi." And I said, "Because I don't think this is going to work. I mean, this is extraordinarily difficult." And I explained to her what the situation was and in the Hebrew situation, and got to have a quiz every day. I said, I just, And she looked at me and she said, Jared, I said, yes. She said, you told me that God told you to come to this school, come to school. So, yeah, I think I made a mistake. She said, no, you told me to give up my job. She said, I did. I said, yes. And she said, we spent every dime we had to purchase this house. We don't have any money. Said, yes. And you saying that this is too difficult and that we got to go back to what? And I said, well, we're going to work it out. We're going to do this. And she looked at me and she said, well, let me tell you what I believe. I said, okay. She said, I believe that here's what needs to happen. She said, you need to study and pray because we ain't going nowhere.
I think we as pastors, there's an old saying. It says that I'm only as strong as the backbone that walks with me. And
I'm gonna tell you something, man. She said she didn't say that we're not going in a place. She said we ain't going nowhere.
Nowhere.
I suggest you pray and study because we ain't going nowhere. You told me the Lord brought you here. You need to get the training. You need to go to seminary, and we got to make it work. And I suggest that you get to studying and praying.
Oh my God. I love it.
Had she agreed with me, I never would have finished seminary. We'd have gone back to Greenville, Mississippi. But to show you the magnitude of that lady, she said, no, sir, we're not doing that. And because of her unwillingness to do that, I had to pray and study and stayed in seminary. And believe it or not, and when I graduated from seminary, if memory has it correct, I think I carried an A- average in Hebrew. I mean, my wife, it was unbelievable. That's the kind of lady that she is. She has been an integral part of anything good that has happened in my life. No question about it. And I'm indebted to God for having given her to me. And I'm indebted to her for having been unequivocally a tremendous partner in the ministry. Now, this very well may not resonate with a lot of people, but I want to tell you, my wife has worked the whole time we've been married, except probably 3 years. We had our second child. I told her to go home, and but she worked in the banking industry, and she's always done that. And then, of course, she came and they started her to work in here in the church with me. So she's been involved in the ministry. She was business administrator for the school, our school here for a number of years, and then the chairman of the board convinced her to become director of the school. He told her for 90 days, and I think she stayed 32 years.
Oh my God.
Involved in ministry. But the point I make is the whole time that she's been involved in ministry, here at the church, working and everything else with the kids and all, to this very day, she literally cooks breakfast and lunch every day.
Ooh.
Every day.
You're right. It's not going to resonate with all.
Yeah, every day.
Yeah.
Every day. She says, I want to make sure that that you have breakfast and you have lunch if you want at home. If you choose to do something different, that's fine, but I'm going to make sure this happens. She has been an integral part. It's unbelievable at the type of lady she is. I simply cannot, and this is not no exaggeration, I simply cannot overstate what an integral part she has had in my ministry, in this journey. In fact, the business, I say this again, any good thing that has happened to me in ministry, she is an integral part of it.
I love it. And I love it, Dr. Young, because hearing you almost tears me up inside because I'm thinking of me and my wife's relationship. I remember back in 2016, I was walking across the street and I got hit by a car. That month I've been teaching on showing up in the house of God in your broken state. So, young preacher, slightly dumb, instead of going to the house to mend my wounds, it happened on a Friday. I was at church that Sunday for church anniversary. And I told somebody, I said, and I love my church, but the person who walked with me through that process of not being able to work for 2 weeks, and my wife had been a stay-at-home mom for many of years, but during that time she was working, not being able to work for about 2-3 months, losing my father, all of this stuff back to back. She walked with me in the process of my healing. And even at some of the most broken parts of my life where depression hit, there was her that was integral in looking and examining her husband and saying something needs to change. And so I completely agree with you. I think having not only is the man blessed, but he is, as one person says, probably blessed better than he deserved.
Oh, no question. No question. No question. I mean, hey, that's real, man. I mean, she is the epitome. And I'll tell you another thing. This is a little sidebar. True story. In the latter years of ministry, at one time, I didn't hug people and things like that. Wasn't that kind of guy. Got older and wiser and a whole bunch of other things. And people come up and they want to hug and things. And so one Sunday, several members of they just hugging me and they said, "Pastor, you blessed me today." And so apparently some of the makeup and stuff was on the collar of my shirt.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I went out to eat after church that Sunday. One of the preachers came up to me and saw the makeup on the shirt, and he said, "Miss Young, did you see that makeup on that shirt? Look is that your makeup? Is that your makeup?" I said, "What you gonna do?" She said, "I'm gonna send his shirt to the cleaners tomorrow and get it clean."
I like Dr. I love Sister Young.
That's what she said, man. She told me, "That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get his shirt clean. That needs to come off his collar. He doesn't need to wear that over there like that. So I'll get it clean tomorrow. I'll take it to the cleaners."
So I do have another question. And it's something you said. Sometimes in ministry, we have to deal with the messiness that comes with ministry. The folk that they start trouble out of nowhere. And sometimes it's warranted because they're mad at the decision that we made. Or sometimes it's not because they just, as one person told me, the devil just got in me. My question to you is, what are some areas of challenges that you've seen in this litany of years in leadership that you've had to deal with that may have, here it is, been pivotal in determining your leadership?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a couple of things, and let me make one statement before I move, and that is, when it comes to my family, my wife, my kids, my grandkids, everybody else, the church knows, everybody knows this, that you can say what you will, do what you will to the pastor. I mean, I'm fair game. My family is off limits.
Come on.
Period. That is the bottom line. Case closed.
Yes, sir.
Full stop. The family off limits. All right.
I'm with you on that.
No discussion. Let me tell you what happened to me as a very young preacher. My father, I told you, was a preacher pastor.
Yes, sir.
In 1974, I graduated from Russ College. As a young preacher, my father and I went from our hometown, little town there north of Greenville, on our way to Clarksdale, Mississippi, on our way to Memphis, actually, because we stopped in Clarksdale. At that time, they had a Holiday Inn right there on 61. And my dad said, we'll stop and have breakfast. So we stopped and we sat, and my father took that opportunity to share with me. Let me tell you what my father did that changed my life, and literally, I think became a North Star in my life. And we're sitting there, and my dad said to me, he says, Jerry, yes, sir. He said, son, I want you to go to seminary. Now, my father did not graduate from seminary. My father didn't graduate from college. I'm telling you, my father was a preacher back then who didn't even have a high school diploma. I'm telling you, man, he went to an extension center of the seminary once he was called to preach in the town, the extension center from the seminary thing. My dad did some, but my father said to me, I want you to go to seminary. So I'm thinking, hey, 1974, I just graduated. I'm now pastor to two of the largest churches in Greenville, Mississippi. Okay, already. I mean, one church was pastored by the president of the state convention up there, and the other one was pastored by the president of the Congress. So I have both of those churches, two part-time in the city of Greenville. And my father says he wants me to go to seminary. I'm listening. And then here's what my father said to me. He said, Jerry, I want to share a couple of things, but yes, sir, Dad. He said, Jerry, I have preached all over this country. And my father went to tell me about all of the places he had preached. In Michigan, in California, in Illinois, I mean, all over the place. My father was a tremendous preacher. And he said, and Jerry, I was offered a church in Michigan, in Lansing, Michigan, and they tried to get me a church in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and they tried to get me a church in Chicago, Illinois, and they elected me to a church in Memphis, Tennessee, and they elected me to a church out in and I said, Dad, he said, yeah, these people actually, because I went to do revivals for them and preached, and then they elected me and told me, look, we've elected you. And he said, I never left. I said, Dad, you mean tell me you were called to full-time churches and you remained in the Mississippi Delta with part-time churches? I mean, you got one church on one Sunday, this Sunday. I said, Dad, I mean, why? I mean, he said, my God. And here's what my father said to me. He says, Jerry, I remained with these little small churches in the Mississippi Delta, and I did not take any of those churches because I knew I could preach to those people because God had called me to do that. He said, but I knew I couldn't pastor them.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
That's what my father said to me. And he said, I couldn't pastor them because I wasn't trained. And as a result, he said, I wouldn't go into a situation where I knew that I was not qualified to pastor those people. He said, I do not want that to happen in your life. He said, I want you to be trained so that if God chooses to use you in some way, then I want you to be trained and that you don't have to say, I can't pastor those people, but I can preach to them. He said, that's why I want you to go to seminary, son. Then my father concluded the conversation with me on this note. He says, because Jerry, he said, I want you to remember this. Everything rises and falls with leadership. That's what my father told me. And he said, you need to be trained if you're going to lead the church. Now, here's a man, Doc, that didn't finish high school, didn't go to seminary, and he's telling his son who just finished college that you need to go to seminary.
It sounds like he had a lot of leadership on his.
Doc, he blew my mind. I mean, he literally blew my mind. My dad did. And it was out of that conversation in particular and that event that I was convinced I had to go to seminary. And from what my father told me, had a lot to do with the fact that I went to seminary, went back and got a doctorate, and my dissertation was written primarily on church leadership because of what my father told me. And when you talk about books and things that I read all kinds of books, theology and all those stuff, but I read leadership more than I do probably any other book apart from the Bible. Okay. Apart from the scripture and studying to preach, I read leadership because that's where I am now. And there's probably not a book that Maxwell has written that I have not read.
Yeah, John C. Maxwell's my guy.
Yeah. There's probably not a book, man, that he has written that I have not read. And when you start talking about the various books and things like that, whether it's R.C. Sproul, whether it's books on vision, whether it's, you name it, man, that's what I read. In fact, the business, I've got a book now. I've read it 2 or 3 times. I'm reading it again now. R.C. Sproul on life views. Reading it now. John R. Stott. I read his stuff right now. Man, it's a tremendous book entitled Involvement, Being a Christian. I read James Sawyer book on the universe next door that talks about presuppositions and the like, and how do we as Christians actually practice Christianity in the current culture. Man, look, when you talk about that, I read religiously, and I am one who is an avid reader of theology, but I read philosophy. I'm a small time philosopher, really. I read all of the arguments about the existence of God. I'm one of those guys who believe that ultimately I know for a fact that I can prove the existence of God, even though I may not prove the existence of the God of the Bible. In your mind, I can prove God does exist.
So I from that, and I guess this is the struggle. You have so many preachers that are now, they did a study the other day talking about how so many pastors that are preaching don't really have a spiritual education. But then the struggle that I see, especially in my generation, is you can have a pastor that is well learned, has been to theology school, seminary, and then you have a church where they are traditionally taught, but not spiritually as developed. And it seems as if there's a conflict. Being such an avid learner, such an avid reader, one of the people that I read often, he says, leaders are readers. How do you bring that all in and unify it with the pastoring as well as your personal and self-development?
Let me tell you what Dr. Kistemacher told us when I was a seminarian. Here's what he said. He said, when you take the New Testament Greek text, Koine Greek, and he said, when you go through the Gospels, he said, here's what you're going to discover. He says, you're going to discover that when it says, and Jesus went about preaching and teaching, he says, here's what you're going to discover. That it says that Jesus went about teaching 67% of the time. And only 33% of the time does it say Jesus went about preaching.
Wow.
He says, fellows, let me explain to you all, if you are going to develop a ministry, he said, let me tell you what that translates into. That you've got to teach twice as much as you preach. And so I took from that from Dr. Kistemacher, a great giant of a man. And I said, I've learned this. And I don't know where I read this years ago after Dr. Kistemacher said that, don't know where, but whoever said it, I embraced it. Teaching grows up a church, and preaching can blow up a church.
Ooh.
And the question becomes whether you want to blow it up or whether you want to grow it up. Okay. And for that reason, I am an expository exegetical preacher. That's what I do. I preach the text.
Yes, sir.
I preach the scriptures. I labor with the text. And I make sure that whatever main divisions I have in a message come out of the text. Okay. And one of the things that I guard against is taking the text out of its context.
Come on.
Because and I've learned this, and I believe it's a true statement. My brother told me this. He heard somebody say this some time ago, said, but here's the problem. Whenever a preacher takes a text out of context, he's trying to con you with the text.
Ooh.
And so my position, philosophy is very simple. You teach, you train. And how do you do that in terms of pastoring and everything else? You have to have a staff. I could not do what I do without a staff. And I've had people on staff with me. For instance, my executive assistant, who has worked for me for 40 years, full time. My Christian education director has been with me full time for 30 years. I've had my own daughter who works in the ministry who's been here 30 years. I mean, you're talking about people been on staff, my associate ministers, my evangelism folk, staff. No pastor preacher can be effective by himself.
Come on.
It simply does not happen. And the thing about New Hope Church has been extraordinarily kind and gracious to me to allow me to have staff, to have people to come and help, because I can delegate tasks and responsibility to my staff and they make it happen.
Oh, you helping us, Dr. Young.
That's how we do it. And then the other thing about it is this. Also, years ago, I determined that I was not going to appoint deacons to the deacon ministry. I decided I was going to ordain deacons to the deacon ministry.
Okay.
And they only get ordained after they've gone through training. The first group I trained took me a whole year. I trained for a whole year. Now I don't train a whole year. I train about 4 months, something like that, 4 or 5 months, and train deacons. And one of the things that we have done, the deacon ministry of our church, I think we have about 58 deacons in our church now. And these men are trained. And they'll tell you right now that we have 3 reasons to be in the church. So that's 3 reasons. These are our purposes. Says, number 1, as a deacon, my purpose is to serve God. That's my purpose. He said, secondly, my purpose is to serve God's people. And then he said, and my third purpose is to serve with my pastor. That's why I'm involved in deacon ministry. The key becomes having people on your team, your staff, the deacons and trust, everybody else. I have an administrative staff concept in our church where we have a leadership team. And the leadership team is made up of about 22 people, 22, maybe 25 people now on the leadership team. These are the people that help me to be effective in ministry. That's how we do it. The pastor has got to be willing to train people, to hire people, bring people in, and then he has to be willing to share the power, to share the authority, and to allow people to help you do ministry. That's how I do it. I could not do what I do if I did not have staff, deacon ministry, leadership team Everybody's doing ministry. We have, I think, about 45 or 46 different ministers in our church. And I'm telling you, it's a beehive of activity all the time. But these are people who make it happen. These are people who make it happen. They do it. And we train. I do leadership training in the church. I promise you, pastors, I don't have issues. I mean, when I ran for president of the National Convention and the election was in New Orleans, Louisiana, the first time.
Yes, sir.
I did not know this, but I was there. And that night at the rally in New Orleans, Louisiana, the deacon minister from New Hope Church came to New Orleans, Louisiana, and all 58 or 60 men came walking down the aisle at that meeting. And they said, we came here to support our pastor and to let you all know the kind of leader that he is.
Oh my God.
It blew me and everybody in the room completely away. 58 or 60 men came in that room. And I'm gonna tell you, there were PhDs, there were physicians and dentists, there were college professors, deans of school of something else at this school, and there were principals of schools, and there were attorneys, and then there were people who just finished high school in that group.
That is so. Now, you just said something, because in essence, you're saying your circle matters in leadership.
You better know it, brother.
As we have pastors that are bivocational, we have churches that they have the capability, but they may not be there yet. And I think you gave us the key. Teaching is what's going to help get them there. My next question would be to you, where do you see the state? We've been dealing with a pandemic, and you all have successfully been going strong, even in the midst of the pandemic. Where do you see, as the National Baptist president, as a pastor who has years of experience, where do you see the state of our churches going from here?
I want to tell you, I look at the state of the church, and to be honest with you, if I did not believe that God is sovereign, I would be scared to death of the church.
Yes, sir.
One of the problems is that if we are not very careful, oftentimes younger preachers and some of the not so young can be so impressed with his gift that he ignores the need to learn, to grow, and develop spiritually. Here's what I'm saying. There are so many preachers who can preach good, but they're not good preachers. We're going to have good preachers who preach good.
Oh, come on.
Because in the final analysis,
come on.
In the final analysis, the preacher cannot simply preach precepts. He has to preach by pattern.
Yes, sir.
You can't just preach philosophically. You got to practice what you preach.
Yes, sir.
The church is in a bad place, in my humble opinion, because the easiest thing in the world for a preacher to do is to order a sermon and get up and read it or preach it. I mean, just do it. But the key becomes, are you developing spiritually yourself?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Are you spending time with God yourself? Are you getting to know God better yourself? Because you can't lead where you do not go.
Come on. Come on.
Any more than you can come back from where you've never been. You just simply cannot do it. And there are churches that will not come back from the pandemic.
Yes, sir.
We got to reorientate. We got to rethink ministry. I said this some years ago, and guys really gave me a hard time for it. Some 10 years ago, I made the statement that we need to look at our communities and look at our cities and look at our churches and determine whether or not we need to talk about merging churches so that we can actually have a church in the community as opposed to having 5 churches. I said, if you've got 5 churches and those 5 churches have an average of 75 people in those 5 churches, if those 5 churches came together, now you've got a church with nearly 400 people, in that church. Okay. Now, a church of 400 people working collectively can do a great deal more for the community than 5 churches with 75 people working individually on their own thing. I said, we're going to start talking about that. I said, because the church has got to become much more concerned about making sure that the church is not perceived to be a Dead Sea situation. The Dead Sea has no outlets, only inlets.
Yes, sir.
You take in, but there's no way to give it out. I mean, listen, churches have got to, in my humble opinion, become the salt and light of the community where they are.
Yes, sir. That's
what has to happen. And the church has got to have the infrastructure to deliver goods and services to the people. I am thoroughly convinced, and some guys don't get this, but I'm telling you, your gift will make room for you. But what you got to know is that you can't rely on your gift. You've got to get to the place where you're relying on the giver of the gift. That's what has to happen, because ultimately your dependence is on him to lead and guide and help develop ministry. I am so afraid that so many guys do not take ministry seriously.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Guys play with the gospel. They play with church. I mean, and I don't say this with any disrespect now. I really do not.
But you're in good territory here, Dr. Young.
Yeah, but let me tell you one of the things that I am uncomfortable with. I am thoroughly uncomfortable when I hear a preacher say, "I killed them Sunday." I killed them. I killed the whole house. Well, I thought the purpose of the gospel was to make folk alive.
Come on. Woo!
I mean, I thought that's what it was.
Dr. Young, you about to make me happy on this live.
I mean, really. I mean, but it's about doing that. It's about understanding it, in my mind, that when people leave New Hope Church, whether or not they are members of the church, they're visitors, whatever they are, here's the one thing that they will tell you when they leave New Hope Church. I know what Pastor Young preached Sunday. Let me tell you what his points were. Because I am convinced, Dr. Scott told me this years ago, that if the sermon is not reheatable, that's what he told me. If it's not reheatable, then perhaps you ought not to serve it.
We call them gems that you're dropping, Dr. Young. Forever, you're blessing us. I know that you have a busy schedule. I have 3 questions, and if you can give me just a moment off of you.
Yes, brief effort. Yes.
Here it is. One is, what is one major hope? We know that you are getting ready to extend out and get back into the hope, the New Hope ministry full time.
Yes.
What is a hope for not making it political? what's your hope for the next president to carry on?
I say this in all honesty. I hope and pray that whoever the next president is will understand clearly that business as usual simply is not going to work. That what our convention has to do, and I tried this, but the pandemic came, we ended up in court with the school. I mean, it's just horrible stuff, but here's what has to happen, Doc. The National Baptist Convention has got to intentionally become more of a denomination than a convention.
Ooh. Yes, sir.
Has to. That's the key, because a denomination means that there are relationships in place where there are goods and services by being involved in this denomination that helps churches, that you can receive help and you can get training and all kinds of things happen. The convention meets 2 or 3 times a year. And once the convention is over, it's over. That model simply is not going to cut it. And then secondly, and I gave the vision, we never did get there. I mean, the stuff in the first term, the pandemic, but here's the deal. The National Baptist Convention will not, in my humble opinion, not only will it not thrive, but it will not survive if we continue to fight full-time devils with all part-time workers.
Oh, my God. Let me say this before I move on to the next question. I want to give you honor here. The Bible says to give honor to those who serve well. In fact, that you're worthy of double honor, because not too many of us could have handled this pandemic. Many of us start losing our hair and we're stressed out as pastors alone during the pandemic. So much blessings to you, Dr. Young, for staying strong during the pandemic. The next question, which is a little bit lighter, we as pastors, we deal with, and you kind of gave us a little hint on it, we deal with the struggle of having to be a provider or our presence in our family. What is something that you have done in your family that we might be able to adapt in our homes as young ministers or even senior ministers to start adding to our family to make sure that we give them the providing part, but we also don't give up the present part for our families?
Let me tell you straight up. I mean, this is clear as the bell. I got a perfect situation for you right here. Dr. William Thompson, who is Vice President of the National Baptist Convention International Work, resides in Nassau, Bahamas. Very dear personal friend of mine. Love him like a brother. He's been an extraordinary supporter, and I love him dearly. Wife passed. And he called me maybe 4 or 5 days ago, said she had passed, and he wanted me to come into her eulogy. The only time I have gone to the Bahamas, I went for Thompson, my very good friend. I mean, love the guy to death. And I really wanted to go to the Bahamas to do his wife's eulogy. I mean, desperately. But my wife has just had surgery.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And when I went in and talked to my wife about that situation, my wife's surgery, she was having some real issues with the pain and everything else. I said, I cannot leave my wife. I cannot leave my wife. I called Sam, my very good friend, and said, here's what I will do. I will send your tape. You want me to do that, say words of comfort or something? He said, yeah. I said, I'll do that, but I've got to stay with my wife. My friend, let me tell you, I believe that my first and most important church
Yes, sir.
is at 6226 Berrywood, where I live. That's my first church. That's my most important church. I've got to pastor my family before I'm qualified to pastor the church.
I love it. I love it.
And everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. My family comes first. No question about it. I cannot be an effective pastor at New Hope Baptist Church if I'm not an effective pastor at home.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I make no excuses for it. And the members of the church have been there now 42 years. They understand it. Pastor Young is committed to his family. Pastors have got to be committed to their families, man.
Yes,
They've
sir.
got to be. I tell people all the time, if your faith doesn't work at home, you ought not to export it into place.
Dr. Young, listen, I know you have to go. Here's the last thing. And again, from the bottom of my heart, you do not know how much of a blessing this interview has been. What is something that if you were in a room right now and young preachers needed a word, what is something that you would want to leave and impart on them? And I think you've already poured it out to us, but I think it's necessary to say it again in this time and season. What is something that you would lead them with? A word of encouragement, one word, whatever it is.
Well, I would say to young preachers, seriously, man, here is the thing that I would say to them. One, ask God to give you kneeling room to pray, standing room to preach, in which you may practice, that you can become a good preacher who preaches good.
Ooh, Dr. Young, you have blessed us today. Thank you. For those that are watching, I don't know if you recognize how many jewels were given out. We're going to have to learn how to make sure that we are good preachers that preach. I'm grateful for you, Dr. Young. You've been a blessing to not only me today, but our audience today. Thank you so very much.
The pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine. I promise you, the pleasure is all mine. And I pray God that preachers and pastors would practice beyond any and everything else a small degree of humility.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Young. Listen,
the pleasure is mine.
We're here. We've had another phenomenal episode. I'm so grateful for Dr. Young's time. We know he has to go. Join us next time. Please like and subscribe. Have a blessed day. Dr. Young.
God bless you, my brother.
Can I just tell you, this has been a great blessing for me. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that. Me and my wife have not been married, and I know you got to go, but I got to tell you this. Me and my wife have not been married 17 years. Most folk have always said I was strange because my wife, we have 5 wonderful kids. My wife and me we're best friends well before we started dating.
Amen, brother.
And so what you shared helped and blessed me with confirmation.
Hey, praise the Lord, Doc.
So I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Hey, thank you, brother. God bless.
Yes, sir. Have a blessed one.
All right, you bet. Hey, bye.